Welcome everyone to the Brower Center and to Berkeley. My name is Mark Richards. I'm a professor of Earth and Planetary Science, although I'm not a climate person. I'm a solid Earth geophysicist, so I'm here to learn today. I'm also the Dean for Mathematical and Physical Sciences in the College of Letters and Science, and I'm really happy to have this remarkable group of people come together to solve some important problems. I have lots of thank yous, and I'll probably miss some people, but certainly Maria Hjelm and Mary Olmsted have done a huge amount of work to bring together this remarkable assembly of people, so thank you, Maria. Because we're starting a little late, I will be as quick as possible, but I want to say a few things about how this group came together initially, because I think it says a little bit about where we might be going. I believe this started when Bruce Rudin of the Joint Policy Committee and Will Travis came to Dean Keith Gillis of the College of Natural Resources and me and said that they wanted to solve some problems and they wanted Berkeley to help. And the problems they wanted to solve were very ambitious, which is basically to save the Bay Area from climate change. And they were serious. Shortly thereafter, we called together three of our principal climate scientists at Berkeley, Inez Fung, Ron Cohen, and Bill Collins, and we started meeting. I should say that Bruce and Will came to us originally at Bob Dickinson's behest, who's a great friend of physics and at Berkeley. And eventually we involved Dan Miller from the Rhoda Investment Group and Mac McGowan and a number of other faculty, David Ackerley in particular. I'm probably leaving out some names. But this has kind of grown into a concept that is built mainly around ideas about adaptation at the local, regional, and state level, but also mitigation as well. We are thrilled to also have our colleagues from Stanford and Davis here and participating in this session. We of course enjoy and are accustomed to competing with each other in many realms, but there's some things that are so important that you put all that aside. I did wear my red tie today for the Stanford people just to increase the comfort level here in Berkeley. And I think we're all on the same page in the sense that this is something that's so important that we really must work together and in ways that we haven't perhaps in the past. There are a couple challenges that are really clear in a broad sense to me. One is that of awareness. And I mean that in the sense of science and translation. It is because of the funding structure that supports climate science, it is very difficult to achieve what we need in terms of getting the word out, getting strategies that are scientifically based into the public domain, into the private sector, and having them acted upon. I would guess that at UC Berkeley and Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory alone, there must be $30 million a year or so in federal investment in climate change research of one form or another. That's a very large amount of money. If 3% of that, $1 million a year, could be put into translation of this science into the kind of actions that this group is interested in, it would make a huge dent in our ability to prepare the Bay Area both for mitigation and adaptation in the future. The federal government and the agencies are not set up that way. The state, as far as I can tell, the state agencies are not really set up that way, although I'm very happy to have members of the governor's office and the legislature here today to tell us how to fix this and what we may be overlooking. But there is a big gap, and we're, in a sense, we in the universities, it is often said that, well, those scientists don't care, they just want to publish their papers. That's absolutely not true. Our climate scientists at Berkeley, and I'm sure at Davis and at Stanford, also desperately want to see their work translated into sound public policy and action. But the vehicles for doing that are really quite rare, and that's the primary purpose of the Climate Readiness Institute. I also want to make another comment, which is that although originally this institute and summit was focused, I would say, on adaptation. That is, what do we do? How do we respond to or anticipate sea level change, weather change, hydrological systems change, which were big in the news, of course, et cetera. My personal conviction, and I think many of you probably would share this, is that the more we become aware of the true costs and the difficulty of adaptation, the more interested we become in mitigation, that is, a reduction of greenhouse gases. And so I think these two things go hand in hand. These two are not entirely separable, and they will be discussed interchangeably today. And so I think that we will really be interested to see how this territory kind of evolves in the course of this meeting. This is just a beginning. I want it to be clear to everybody in the room, even though we attach the name Institute to this, it's not really an institute yet, it's an idea. And the reason we have this marvelous grouping of people from academia, from industry, the private sector, government agencies, NGOs, foundations, the reason we all want you here is we need to come together and figure out where there is an intersection between the public interest, the science, and the ability to provide modest amounts of resources, funding, to make this happen. That there's a real gap here. And I think that if any place in the world can pull this off, it's the Bay Area. I believe that the Bay Area can become a model for the world and for large metropolitan areas in the world as an example of what can be done to save our cities and to make our cities more resilient and also more responsible. So I want you all to have fun. There are going to be follow-up meetings. This isn't it. We're going to see where this goes. I think Bill Collins and Bruce and their colleagues are going to have their ears very much open today to where this goes and what the next steps might be. I just have to say on a personal note, being here in the Brower Center, that first of all, it's a privilege to be here in the Brower Center. I just came back from a retreat at Bodega Bay this past weekend, and I'm a geologist. And for those of us who are old enough to have this in our minds, you may recall that PG&E tried to build the largest nuclear power plant on the planet in 1963, a quarter of a mile from the San Andreas Fault. And that effort was stopped by an odd assortment of true characters that included the likes of Rose Gaffney and Doris Sloan and Pierre Saint-Armand and David Brower's protege, David Pessinen, who was an environmental lawyer before people knew what environmental law was, I suppose. And of course, David Brower managed to save Dinosaur Park from the damming of the Green River, and famously he saved Grand Canyon from damming. It's hard, when you say those words in the 21st century, it's hard to believe. But I would like to invoke the spirit of David Brower here. We have some really important things that we're capable of doing, and we have to have the guts to do it. We need to come together, we need to have that determination, and we need to believe that our children and our children's generation are going to judge us by whether or not we are able to put aside the shorter-term things that keep us busy and solve these problems together. So I hope that that spirit will reign today. And as the first speaker, I would like to introduce a representative from the governor's office, Michael McCormick. He's a senior planner in Governor Brown's office. He works on greenhouse gas emissions, mitigation, climate change adaptation and preparedness, sustainability, tools and resource development, and communications issue. Mike, I get the feeling you could just solve all these problems for us, so I'm really looking forward to this. And you can unlock all the purse strings in Sacramento for us, too, I'm hoping. He is actively working to institutionalize the consideration of climate change across agencies and organizations. So, Mike, I'm really happy to have you here. It's great to have you keynote this conference.
Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here today. As you all know, there's quite a bit of work being done to respond to the drought right now, and we have a lot of resources put into that. How many people in here are responding to the drought directly or indirectly, some way in their professional or personal lives? All right, that's good. Well, I know about half of you, so That is a good thing. I think it's a really good indication of things to come. How we're responding to this drought is exactly how we need to be responding to climate change as we move forward. A real collaboration, bringing resources together from all levels of government, NGO, business, and really making real progress quickly. That isn't really happening to date. But I'm going to tell you a little bit about what the state is doing, some of the structures we've put in place to hopefully create that implementation over the next couple of years as we implement some of the work that we're doing and work together with our regional and local partners to actually do that as well. How many people are in here from the business community? That's good. Normally there's only 1 or 2 hands that raise, if any. So you guys are a very important part of the conversation. How about for state agency folks? Okay, I know all of you, I think. That's a good sign too, because part of the challenge working in silos at the state is that sometimes you don't know other people in other agencies and departments that are doing exactly the same thing you are. How about folks that are working on regional efforts on climate? And how about the academic community and local government? Elected? All right. It's fantastic to have such a distinguished group of folks here. So what I want to really talk about is what's required for climate, and hopefully, as we go through the day, think about how the Climate Readiness Institute can participate in that discussion and support the state efforts, and how the state might be able to support CRI's efforts. So the first word that comes to mind when we think about climate is transformation. You all know this. What's coming in the future is going to be very significant. It's going to require transformation at all levels of society. Now, the first step, of course, and this was brought up earlier, is reducing our emissions significantly. This is one of the major points on Governor Brown's administration. We need to significantly reduce our emissions, and we need to do it very quickly in order to accommodate what's coming. If we don't do that, we may not be able to adapt to what's coming. Resilience is going to be much harder, and it's going to cost much more money, and it'll have many more impacts on society. So reducing emissions is number one. I know that's not the focus of today, but I think it's something we need to think about in the back of our minds as we think about our response to climate change, particularly the climate impacts that are coming. 2013 was a really interesting year at the state. We had dozens of documents, many of which never referred to climate change in the past, that now respond to climate change. We have the 5-year infrastructure plan that in the preamble talks about the importance of climate change as a consideration in citing new infrastructure at the state level. We're working across different agencies with the Strategic Growth Council within the governor's office to actually incorporate that into many of our decisions around infrastructure expenditures and infrastructure siting as well. So not only considering the emissions associated with infrastructure, but incorporating consideration of climate risk and climate impacts as a part of that discussion. And I think this is a huge change from in the past where it's been business as usual, siting facilities in a willy-nilly sort of way when we think about climate change, right? Except for the CEQA documents. Who here works on CEQA? If you know OPR, you know that that's one of our core competencies is CEQA. Of course, Governor Brown, when he was Attorney General, has been pushing on folks addressing climate change in CEQA documents for a very long time, and it's resulted in some real action at the state. But what we're taking from CEQA being the primary mechanism for dealing with climate change, which is at the end of a process, and trying to move it up to the very front of the process, making it a policy decision, a goal, a priority for design. Because if we are addressing climate change at the end of a process, it's way too late. You know, you can't deal with it through end of process mitigation. This is something we need to be dealing with up front. And it's requiring a transformation of our policy structure at the state level. And it's going to have a cascading effect at the regional and local level too. 2014 is the year that all of the work we've been putting in over the past couple of years to change our documents. 2014 is the year this actually takes place from an implementation standpoint. We have cap and trade funds now that we can leverage to support greenhouse gas emissions reductions. There are co-benefits between resiliency efforts and greenhouse gas emissions reduction. This is really significant. $100 million per year over the next 2 years is going to be focused on local and regional efforts specifically around climate change through the Strategic Growth Council. 50% of that allocated to disadvantaged communities. So we do have some money now to actually do climate change work from the state, which is very exciting. $100 million, though, when you think about it, is a drop in the bucket. So we will need some additional work there. The other $750 million is going to a number of other efforts and organizations, agencies to distribute with the state's planning priorities in mind. The Environmental Goals and Policy Report is something that, if you haven't looked at it, is very important for the structure of the state moving forward. It's currently in public review. It's supposed to be done every 4 years. Last one was done in 1978, if you may remember, under the last Brown administration. And it's basically the goals and policies for the sitting governor at the time around the environment. So what are the steps this sitting administration is going to do to address environmental issues over the next few years? So that's currently in public review right now. There's quite a bit in there about indicators of success when it comes to emissions reductions and adaptation. Those of us that work in the field, we constantly try to figure out how we can prove our policies are actually having an impact on the ground. And this is one way to do that, is identify some standardized indicators statewide that we can look at. And the EGPR is a great place to look to identify some of those. I think there's one piece that's been very important to this administration, particularly within OPR, and that's looking at data. Who in here is just a data nut, loves data? All right, without data, we can't get information. Without information, we can't make good policy. And without good policy, we can't actually have stuff happen on the ground the way we want it to. So data is the starting point for that. We're in the process of unleashing our data at the state through the state's GeoPortal. It's an enterprise system that links all of our data sources together through all of our agencies and departments through a single portal, allowing access to the public, to decision makers. And for those of us that are working internally on policy, this is huge. Previously, if we wanted to access data in another agency or department, you'd have to know the GIS person that managed that data layer. You'd have to contact them, have them put it to a FTP site or email it to you, and then you could build your own project that nobody else knew you were working on. So now we have a system where, and it's going to take a couple of years of roll-in. There's of course data issues across agencies and departments, but it's an exciting first step to make this data free. There's a lot of conversations about how to make this information public. What are the safety concerns and privacy issues? There's a lot of critical facilities that are reflected in that data. But ultimately, we're getting very close to having a set of data that is extremely meaningful. Who here uses parcel information? This is getting really wonky. So we now have access to a parcel data layer that has 280 independent variables. So we were able to, we won't be able to make all of that public. But this is very exciting for those of us that nerd out on data, because all these other data layers can link back to this parcel data, and we can identify parcel-specific impacts and community level policy development, neighborhood level policy development that just wasn't possible before. So we think data and information, particularly third-party application developers that can access this data, is going to revolutionize how we do planning in California in the next couple of years. And hopefully you all will be a part of that revolution. The federal government's taken notice. They're very interested in the tools and data that we're developing. We have a regular call with the White House Council on Environmental Quality every month, particularly to talk about the data that we're developing and information sources that we're developing for climate change. CalAdapt, caladapt.org is currently in an update process. We have the Adaptation Planning Guide, which the federal government is supporting the electronic tool development for, which is very exciting. It takes data and information through CalAdapt and turns it into a planning process and a plan for communities. So Amber Paris has been part of that discussion as well from the Natural Resources Agency. It's great to see you. I didn't know you were going to be here. And so the Natural Resources Agency has been really fantastic in partnering with us on that conversation. And we have a meeting this coming week, the President's Task Force meeting. We're flying down tomorrow to have some pre-meetings. And then on Thursday, we'll be at the President's Task Force on Resilience with, are there any press in here? So one secret is the president might actually show up for this, which is very exciting. He's in town talking about the drought and some of his other important initiatives. So he'll be in LA on Thursday, so we're hopeful that he'll be able to come to the meeting and talk a little bit more about how important dealing with climate change is and how important the state of California is in that discussion. Talking a little bit about some of the other initiatives we're working on, I think I'm not going to go into detail about, I've got a long laundry list I could talk about. You know, there's hundreds of initiatives. I mean, part of the challenge in talking about this stuff is that there's so much going on, there's so many moving parts, and all of you are part of those moving parts. And I probably don't know 9/10 of what's happening with the folks that are in this room, maybe 99/100. But we have an opportunity later this year to talk specifically about resilience. It's called the California Adaptation Forum. The call for proposals is going out on the 20th. And we are looking for some really interesting discussions to take place at the Adaptation Forum. It's going to be August 19th and 20th in Sacramento. We're hoping to have 500 to 600 people there. This is an event that's associated with the National Adaptation Forum. Amber Paris was actually a part of the coordination group for the National Adaptation Forum, and she's my co-chair for the Adaptation Forum here in California. So we want to get the right people at the table to talk about important issues and answer a lot of questions that we have about how we should be moving forward on climate change, impact, and resilience in California. You know, there's a lot of questions right now about what level of government does what in responding to these challenges. We have the Alliance of Regional Collaboratives for Climate Adaptation that is working on this issue. Major regions of the state, San Diego, LA, San Francisco, the San Francisco Bay Area, and Sacramento have come together to talk with each other about how their own efforts on adaptation are moving forward and resilience are moving forward. And it's a really interesting opportunity to share case studies and knowledge about how that works. So they'll be at the table in August, and the state, of course, will be there trying to get Governor Brown to squeeze it into his schedule. John Laird is going to be a keynote. It's a really great opportunity to expand the discussion and keep it going. So what do I think about the Climate Readiness Institute and how it fits into this picture? Does anybody in here think that the academic community and policymakers coordinate well? No? I don't see any hands. I think this is a huge opportunity to bring together two separate groups of folks that do fantastic work but don't talk to each other enough. Typically what happens is the academic literature comes to a conclusion. 5 years later, the policy folks scrape something together from the internet and say, hey, look at this. What just happened? And then 5 years after that, there's legislation that's passed to respond to it, and then 5 years after that, implementation occurs. So 15 years after the academics get to a certain understanding, that's when actual implementation occurs. So my hope is that because this is such an urgent issue, CRI will be able to bring those parties together more efficiently and effectively and create a coordination point within the Bay Area to support these discussions. I also think this could be a huge model for other regions of the state that are doing this. But also the federal government. The federal folks are looking at how to inspire regional action around climate, lacking their own ability at the federal level to do much through Congress. So they're looking at local and regional efforts as a real coordination point for action on climate. Just as an example of a recent example of this connection that hopefully will highlight the value of this potential institute here, or the CRI as an organization, is with the Alliance of Regional Collaboratives. We were developing our climate change research plan at the state level, and we said, why don't we float this out to the regional groups and see if there's any feedback they might have. Maybe they're doing some research on climate themselves. So we floated the idea out to the regional groups through ARCA. And what we got back was just as many research projects as we already had on the books at the state. So basically half the state research plan is regional efforts. And that only reflects probably 1/10 of the work that's being done in the academic institutions around the state on climate. So we have a really important connection to make here. And I'm hoping that CRI can do this in the Bay Area and serve as an example for the rest of the state on how we can do this in other regions. So thank you for being here. I'm very excited to be part of the conversation. I'll be here all day, so look forward to talking with you more. Thank you.
We're actually a little bit ahead of schedule, and since we have Mike's attention, I'm wondering if there's some questions that people might like to address to him.
Can you use the microphone? It's on the floor over there near the water. And there's a little on switch. Thank you so much.
This is a real tactical question. How do you get information about the request for proposals for the conference in August?
So there's a number of different email lists it's going to go out through. It'll go through the OPR email list, the Office of Planning and Research. You can sign up for that through opr.ca.gov. Bruce will definitely get a hold of it, so I don't know if he'll be able to send it out to the list of attendees here. But yes, okay. So there'll be lots of ways to do that.
Mike, are you guys thinking about indicators of resilience?
Yes, and if you've looked at the environmental goals and policy report, there's a substantial component of that focused on indicators for both emissions and resilience. There's a lot of indicators that reflect both, and there's a lot of indicators that you might not normally associate with climate that we might be able to use for that, but we're looking for feedback on those. So, Andy, I don't know if you've provided
you got
feedback.
you got my feedback already.
Oh, that's right.
but the ability of indicators of resilience to bring together, indicators from an economic perspective, from a public health perspective, from an ecological perspective, is a potential interdisciplinary communications tool.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we've been struggling with is Louise Bedsworth is the lead author on the Environmental Goals and Policy Report, and she aggregated the various indicators from our other efforts in the state and came up with 1,000 some odd indicators that various agencies and departments are using to track environmental performance. And she reduced those to something a little bit more manageable, but I think there's still some additional work to be done. The Safeguarding California plan also includes indicators of resilience and talks a little bit more about how state agencies are working internally and externally to talk about climate change.
So I have a question for you, which is your information sources for making decisions. Does the state have a strategy at the moment for how it gets information on how the state's climate is likely to change that's uniform across all state agencies, or is it more or less kind of finding what's at hand?
We have primarily through the California Energy Commission, through Guido Franco's work. They're the leads on the climate change research program within the state, and they're the aggregators of the information. And then state agencies and departments use that to really drill down into the details of their specific sector. I think one great example is the work that the Ocean Protection Council has done on their sea level rise guidance in bringing together leading experts in the field and using state data to generate a sea level rise guidance document that can be used by state agencies and departments.
Mike, I have a somewhat political question, which is if one aggregated the federal expenditure in universities and national labs in the state of California on climate research, my guess is it's several $100 million a year, maybe more. There are people in this room who could answer that question. And I'm wondering how the argument would play in Sacramento that the state would be wise to invest a modest amount to leverage this research for the good of the state in a way that's not being accomplished right now.
Absolutely. We've actually had that conversation internally, and I think that we're still working out how that might look. I mean, part of the value, we're really excited to have a climate hub now located, the USDA Climate Hub for the Southwest region at UC Davis. It's a huge opportunity. I think that was just released last week. So I think there's a huge benefit there to having an entity that can connect the dots when it comes to federal and state research. Governor Brown was just in the president's office for the UC system talking about this as well. So I think we're making progress there. A lot more progress needs to be made. Maybe we can use this as a test case for how that discussion might occur.
I guess I'm wondering if a white paper from this group or something of that nature might be helpful or useful.
Absolutely. I think, case studies on how effective communication can occur and outcomes that actually impact policy is really valuable. And that's one of my great hopes for CRI.
Any more? Just one more question, maybe.
Thanks.
Mike, you always have the
Milkey.
tough questions.
Oh, well. Actually, I don't think this is that tough. So I think you might be aware of what Paulson, Steyer, and Bloomberg are doing with regards to risky business. Any conversations about how the state can leverage what's going on there? I've talked with Kate and others at Center for Next Generation about how we can start translating that data to action at the regional level and talking about the Bay Area as a possible test bed.
That conversation is happening. Don't really have any details at this point. We are proposing a component of the California Adaptation Forum to talk about that connection to business and insurance. So we're starting to reach out folks, including to Kate, to talk about how that discussion might occur at the Adaptation Forum. So I think August is sort of the sweet spot for how we're bringing our resource documents together, regional action, local efforts, the President's Task Force preliminary recommendations. Hopefully it's all going to come together at the Adaptation Forum, and we're going to have a really great discussion.
Thank you so much, Mark.
Great. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you so much, Mark, and thanks, Mike, for really getting the morning off to a great start. I'm going to be speaking to you in a moment, so this is not my chance to speak to you just yet, but I did want to introduce the next section of the program on climate change in the Bay Area, an overview. And we have 3 talks of 15-minute slots. Actually, most of that's going to be, a fair amount of that's going to be devoted to a discussion with you from 3 people who have been leading the charge in terms of how we frame this issue from a scientific perspective, from a policy perspective, from a business perspective. And we're going to start with a talk by David Ackerley, who's been one of my colleagues who's been integral in getting the Climate Readiness Institute to this stage of its launch. He's a professor of integrative biology at UC Berkeley and also been very active in Bay Area affairs, and it's a real pleasure to hear from David. This is also my cue to get his talk loaded, so give me a second. And I hope this is your talk. Is this your talk, David? I can't even navigate.
Yes,
Yes.
I know.
Yeah. We have to look at the big screen here. Get rid of this thing. So you're somewhere down here.
You might be able to launch it from there.
And see if this is you. Nope, wrong talk.
You might be able to launch it right there.
Okay.
If you come back
Yeah.
to the screen.
This requires,
We're really good at this.
yes, this requires more hand-eye coordination. Yeah.
So you'll be glad to know you will be subject to very few PowerPoints today, but this
Yeah.
is one of them.
Yeah, no, we're almost there. Sorry about this. Somebody made your talk disappear. You think this is it?
This is it. Yeah, can you?
Okay, sure.
Oh, wait. Go back.
Yeah.
Slide it up. So we
Yes. See, it takes a village. Here we go. I think we're good. Excellent.
Sorry, no, that was the last slide, but besides that. Okay, there we are. Thank you very much, Bill. It's a pleasure to be here and to welcome everyone to Berkeley. I have the distinct pleasure of giving the good news talk about all of the changes that we face in the coming century. And afterwards, Bruce Reardon will talk about many of the efforts already going on, and Jim Wonderman about the business community's perspective. And I think probably best to hold questions because it's much more interesting to have a dialogue with a panel than to go one by one. This photo, you can't see too well under the lights here. This is 1 year ago in January of 2013 with a beautiful snow cover blanket in the Sierras and Nevada. And if you drill in and look at this photo, the farmlands are green, the pastures are green. It's beautiful winter in California. And it's just a reminder of how much climate and physical geography set the context for our society and for the natural world, how deeply dependent we are, from the timber and water and, of course, the gold originally in the Sierra to our incredibly rich farmland and our proximity to the Pacific, which has everything to do with the development of California's economy, first in physical means, and now, of course, we've transformed that into an electronically based economy, and we're here at the heart of it. 1 year later, this is what we faced before last weekend's storm, when there is no snow, the farmlands are green, are brown, the pastures are brown, and it's just that constant reminder of how dependent we are on climate. The paradox is that there's nothing we like better than talking about the weather and how much it's constantly changing. And yet at some deep level, we're also, against that background of variability, we're also very committed to this underlying stability. And the last 10,000 years, we know, are one of the most stable periods in climate history in recent geologic time. So it is that paradox of both this sort of stability that we've built up our society in the context of certain sea levels, of certain climate, even as we deal with these year-to-year fluctuations. But against those year-to-year fluctuations, we now face this inexorable underlying shift in the basic physical parameters of the climate system. Every piece of the global system is at work in this puzzle, and it's been an enormous effort to really come to grips with the global climate system. But at the heart of it, we know that fossil fuel emissions are the fundamental driver against the background of population, land use change, and the many other factors. And carbon emissions are still growing. We're all well aware of this, approaching 10 gigatons per year. And this is our fundamental question in terms of climate, is when this curve stops going up. When will we reach a peak CO2 emissions and begin to turn things the other direction, if we do, in this century, which of course most of us have some hope for? I want to frame it that way too, and then connect it to this picture that came from the most recent IPCC report, which for me really changed the way I looked at the climate. I mean, even having thought about this a lot. We're all bombarded with the uncertainty problem. Oh, we don't know how much warmer, we don't know how much the climate's going to change. What this slide shows is on the x-axis, just the horizontal axis, what's the cumulative amount of carbon we have injected into the atmosphere, starting from the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, and how much will that go up? And as of today, we've reached almost 500 gigatons. And climate has warmed almost 2 degrees Fahrenheit in that 100 years. The fundamental uncertainty here is how much carbon goes into the atmosphere. Once we have some handle on where we go as a society, we've come to an enormously really confident degree of understanding about what that might mean for the climate system. And as many of you know, if anything, the estimates on the impacts on climate are somewhat conservative. The unknown factors in the climate system are more likely to make climate change more. There are fewer unknowns that would make these pessimistic estimates in a sense. And we'll come back to talk about what those numbers might mean. So to think about this peak CO2, if CO2 emissions started to decline in 6 years, we might only see another degree and a half of warming. And I've gone to Fahrenheit here. It's always a question of which units we're in. This is in Fahrenheit. I think 6 years we know is not within reach at a global scale. If CO2 emissions peak and begin to decline in mid-century, we certainly could be seeing 4, 5, 6 degrees Fahrenheit of warming globally. And on the current trajectory, where we have no turning point in sight, where we get up to the high end of 7, 8 degrees of warming. And this is, the climate mitigation question is clearly fundamental to where we fall on that axis. In the Bay Area, what I'm going to talk about very briefly here is I want to put it in the three C's for this morning: carbon, climate, and also our connectedness to the rest of the world. So again, that carbon question is essential to the degree of climate change that we experience. And on this path to a low-carbon society, we all grapple with the challenge that no region plays a large role quantitatively. If we could all flick a switch and change the Chinese economy, we would begin to really make a difference at a global scale. But we know the Bay Area by itself quantitatively is not the key to the global climate change. But as has already been said this morning, the role that we have to play is a leadership role, leading by example, leading by technology innovation, and also this increasing sense that metropolitan and regional efforts are bubbling up more to national and international efforts rather than the other way around. So I think we all know that there is something to, there's important steps to be taken on mitigation, and it's not simply by doing the math about how much carbon the region itself will save. And in the process of doing that, if we have embedded into our own economy the price of carbon, whether it's in the impacts or the actual prices that may come, we are positioning ourselves to sustain our economy into the future. I'll talk more about the impacts. This is more my area as a biologist. And for me, I kind of look at these in three big areas: sea level rise, the questions about the water supply, and then a bit of a sort of everything else, which comes with the impacts of rising temperatures, changing storm patterns. And I think everyone could add different items to this list, but this is just framing a problem and really reminding everyone, I think everyone here, in a sense, I hope that there's not too much that's new here, because this is an audience that's very interested in these things, but just to start us out on the same page. Sea level rise clearly tops our many agendas in the Bay Area. It is not the only problem by any means, but the effects are inexorable. It's obvious where they will occur, and the impacts will be felt across many different sectors. And the King Tides Initiative, some of you will know, is this effort to get out there on the exceptional high tides of the year and begin to get that image of what the high sea level events look like. We know we have excellent modeling, certainly many very interesting problems in marshland ecology that will have to do with the extent of flooding from sea level rise, but the impacts are pervasive and widespread. The one comment I wanted to make here is more of a conceptual one, and this is one thing we do. This is one thing that academics do bring to the table. How do we think about these problems? Well, here's one of the most simple ones. What in the world is a 100-year event? And that's language we will have to let go of. Because today's 100-year event, by the end of the century, could be the monthly high tide. And just that concept of return intervals for extreme events has been very central to a lot of planning, a lot of the way we plan for floods, plan for droughts, and plan for sea level. And it's one we have to find new language to talk about, because if we can't perpetuate that sense that these are rare events as they become increasingly common. A second main takeaway point I wanted to make is just that it's already been brought up once this morning, that the impacts of many extreme events, as the impacts of many disruptions in our society, fall disproportionately on different sectors. And in the case of sea level rise, in parts of the Bay Area, it is some of the very low income and vulnerable populations who are most at risk. And in other places, such as in the South Bay, it is some of the very highest end of the corporate world that are at risk. So this spreads across all sectors. Right now, we're very much grappling with another aspect of water, and in this case, it's the shortage of water, not too much water lapping at our shores. Folsom Lake Reservoir this winter, as people were seeing gold rush ruins that hadn't been seen since the lakes were flooded. And this unprecedented news of the State Water Project turning off the taps for 2014, this including impacting some communities in the Bay Area, which normally receive water and are now looking to other water sources. Now this, again, this is, I think we're very familiar with this dilemma that, can we say this drought is due to climate change? We'll never be able to say this drought or this storm is due to climate change. And probably many of you have heard the baseball metaphor. The Bay Area version is, the Barry Bonds version, is, which of Barry Bonds' 73 home runs was due to steroids? And we never say any one of them was due to steroids, but we know that 73 is too many. And this is exactly what we're dealing with droughts and storms, that it isn't an interesting question to ask which storm, right? But it is an important question to step back and look at the entire regime of climate and how that is shifting. And that's a very legitimate area of scientific inquiry. What we do know is, regardless of the rainfall, regardless of the storms, our biggest reservoir is shrinking. Because even if it rains in winter, the problem is the temperatures in the Sierra, and as the snow line moves up and less of that precipitation falls as snow, it's not stored and it doesn't melt and become available through the summer. So the storage problem looms, even though one of our greater uncertainties is about future precipitation. We know we have a very significant problem with where we will store our water, and the impacts are felt across all of California, including the Bay Area. There's too little water. There will also be too much water. Just a reminder that extreme events go in both directions, and flooding events, which do impact the Bay Area, may increase in very wet years. Probably the biggest single concern around that is, of course, the way those impact the levees and the entire delta, which comes back and ties in with the water system, something we're reading a lot about right now in the press. And finally, in that third area, thinking about temperatures and some of the extreme events that go with it. One of the problems we face in communicating climate change is, 2 degrees, 3 degrees, it doesn't actually sound like very much. If you go out and say, wow, it was 86 today, And you say, oh, it was 89. It's like, well, I mean, it was high 80s, right? Doesn't sound like, 3 degrees doesn't sound like much. Here's one place we need to translate it and be thinking about it more. A 6-degree average increase in mean temperatures under one scenario here, one run of a future model, leads to a 15-fold increase of the number of days that exceed a heat threshold, a local heat threshold here in the Oakland area. So we can say, oh, we have the fog, we have the ocean, heat events aren't a problem. But those hot days do have an impact. And of course, they have an impact on the electrical grid, on air conditioning, on public health. And we just have to think about a future where, in a sense, the entire summer could become a heat wave, barring, of course, radical efforts in mitigation. Again, vulnerable populations are most at risk: the elderly, the low income who do not have access to air conditioning, and especially in California, farm workers who have already felt the brunt of past heat waves in increased mortality and heat-related deaths. Another aspect of our system that's intimately tied to climate is, of course, agriculture. The impacts in the Central Valley are sort of a separate conversation, and that ties into the water system. Here in the Bay Area, a $1 billion business in our wine industry, and there are different ways of sort of looking ahead at the impacts of climate on vineyards. This is one recent CEC study, simply making the point that the high summer temperatures that produce the best wines will inexorably move towards the coast. Unfortunately, the coast may not have the deep soils of a Napa Valley or a Sonoma Valley. You cannot pick up a vineyard and put it down just anywhere without all the other pieces of the puzzle coming together. The agriculture business is not waiting around to address these issues. We know that vineyards are actively buying land farther north, investing in Oregon, and looking ahead because they certainly are well aware of their dependence on the climate system. My own work is on vegetation and open space. One of the really, what is it that brings us, many of us, to the Bay Area? The quality of life here. In addition to having a very vibrant economy, many people will point to the open space and our quality of life. And if we look at future climates and how we would expect the vegetation cover to respond eventually through many different ecological mechanisms, we see projections that could suggest large areas of redwood forest would be supporting shrublands. And even to think about the ecological events that would be required for a redwood forest to become a shrubland, these are very dramatic, visible, and visceral kind of changes that we would be experiencing. And of course, one of the mechanisms that does drive vegetation change is wildfire. As an ecologist, we embrace wildfire in some settings. This is not all bad, but increased fire frequencies, which are projected for the Bay Area, that it could begin to look like Southern California, have very significant implications for building codes, land use, and zoning to reduce future vulnerability as fire regimes do shift. The last point then is just in this one picture, and I don't want to spell it out. And again, these are familiar topics. The impacts of climate change will not just be felt locally on our local systems, just sort of from these direct impacts. We are connected to a broader world. We're intimately connected to a broader world. So whether it's drought in the Middle East and climate conflicts that then drive our federal budgets and our federal policies and our decision makers who are then spending a lot of time worrying about these problems, well, that means attention is focused somewhere else in the world, and it's impacting us. Whether it's droughts in the Midwest and impacts on food prices, which we may feel relatively buffered from at this point compared to some parts of the world, but over time, we don't know where that goes. Supply chain impacts on businesses are increasingly very much on people's radar. Here are pictures of the floods in Thailand, flooding out a lot of new Hondas waiting for shipment. And a picture there from Hurricane Sandy, just this constant reminder that we are tied into the impacts felt in the rest of the world. And what we need to adapt to, in many ways, may be the impacts felt elsewhere, as much as they are the direct impacts on us as it impacts the economy and the political system in the way that we have to respond to these challenges around the world. So I just realized this, I dropped a slide out there. I just wanted, what I dropped in there was that one of the many things we bring to this effort, and we have this enormous resources in the Bay Area, has been an enormous degree of attention in terms of research. The academic community has been engaged on many fronts. And we are in this unique position with the California Energy Commission, having funded California-specific and Bay Area-specific research. Very few places in the world have had the level of support to really focus attention of the academic community on our local and regional issues. So we are just incredibly well positioned in that way. And with that knowledge and in this unique effort to collaborate across public, private, NGO, and governmental sectors. I think the academic community, as Mark said, it's not for lack of interest. A lot of academics, we only do this because we do believe it will make a difference in the world. But finding the vehicles to make that difference can be difficult, and we're here and very excited to be engaged in this. Thanks very much.
Let's see if I can manipulate the PowerPoint a little bit more expeditiously. Our next speaker this morning is Bruce Reardon. Bruce has been involved in the planning for the summit and also the conceptual development of the Institute since its early days, and in fact is one of the people who really triggered our discussions at Cal and at Berkeley Laboratory to begin thinking about the Institute and then broadening it to our partner universities. So it's a real pleasure to hear from him this morning. He's a climate strategist with the Joint Policy Committee, and his talk is somewhere on this computer. So let me find that. That's it. This is it? Oh, good. Well, then my work here is done. If I can figure out how to manipulate the little mouse guy. Yep. Yeah. Yes, got it. Yes, got it. Thank you. Bruce, you're on.
Thanks, Bill. I'm happy to be here. My mother pointed out just the other day that I was born at Stanford Hospital. I grew up here in a big Cal family living in Berkeley, and I went to Davis, so I've got the bases covered here. She had to put that together. I hadn't thought of it. So I'm running a project for the Joint Policy Committee, Kresge Foundation, and San Francisco Foundation that's building a network of practitioners around adaptation and resilience in the 9-county region, government agencies, NGOs, private sector, about 200 individuals right now from those different sectors in this network, and it's growing every week. So as we work together here today to launch and give life to this new initiative, the CRI, we thought it would make sense to just take a quick 10-minute little run through what are some of the current projects that are going on in the Bay Area relevant to the CRI, and what are some of the barriers that we're facing out there where the CRI could really jump in and make a significant difference for the practitioner community in the region. We are just finishing a status report on each of the 9 counties, a kind of a snapshot on climate adaptation and resilience. We'll mail that to you or email that to you in a couple weeks when it's done, but for today, I just have drafts with me, and we'll run through kind of a sneak preview for you here. So we are redrawing and making some nice graphics, but this isn't one. But I thought I'd put it up because it's really instructive about our biggest topic that we're facing right now in terms of sea level rise and extreme storms. This is a rough sketch that Joe LeClaire at BCDC did for us one day in an hour and a half of about 40 different projects in the region right now on sea level rise and coastal and bay flooding. It's an impressive list of projects. Starting over here on the left, you've got private sector, Union Pacific, Chevron, Google, and others involved with assessments on their own facilities and all. Clear on the far right, you've got BCDC and a whole set of projects, ABAG and the Coastal Conservancy, and now working together on what we're calling Resilient Shoreline Program. In the middle, you've got a set of things that are going on in all 9 counties, run by local entities, by state and federal groups, and often in collaborations of nonprofits working with government agencies, working with the feds. We've got the South Bay Salt Ponds project. We've got Flood Control 2.0, our CoStar Future, just a whole set of projects. So it's very impressive, and you'll get more into this in one of our breakouts today. So that's first. The second biggest focus area, thankfully, right now in our region is from our water agencies on water supply. This is kind of a cleaner looking picture because it's mostly about water agencies. Where sea level rise was involving a whole set of different players, this is primarily, not completely, but primarily water agency driven. And there are a wide range of projects that those agencies in our region are taking on. Assessments, as you can see kind of on the top row there, middle, SFPUC assessment of different climate scenarios and the impacts on Hetch Hetchy water supply. We've got a lot of work great work going on conservation and water efficiency at all of the different districts. If you come down here to the bottom, Sonoma's involved with NOAA and Scripps on some work on atmospheric rivers. They were actually up in a hurricane hunter plane this weekend learning about the atmospheric river event that we had here in Northern California just over the weekend. We've got the IRWIMP, one of my favorite acronyms, the Integrated Regional Water Management Plan done by all the agencies that for the first time this year now includes climate change. We've got a lot of work going on in the Delta, and we have a coalition of the water agencies working together, so not just individually, but working together, BAWAC. Third focus area where there's a fair amount of action right now is around energy, and it's really two sides. We've got protection of energy infrastructure, and we've got work to make ourselves much more resilient in terms of energy efficiency and local renewable power. Both those things going on in the energy world, and I've put up some examples again of them here. PG&E doing some terrific work. They have an interdepartmental team working on the impacts of storms and heat and sea level rise and all on their infrastructure, so the lights stay on. We've got Marin Clean Energy and Sonoma Clean Power up on the top right there that are really leading the way on local control of renewable power and power sources in our region. This is called Community Choice. And Marin is first, and Sonoma's going online in March. Marin is now at 50% renewables for their entire service area there. And it only costs a little under $1 more a month to get 50% renewables in your mix at your home in Marin. Sonoma is going to go even further with a lot more focus on local renewables. So this is a very impressive and a very important step in the Bay Area. Marin's now able to fund out of ratepayer money energy efficiency work, feed-in tariff work. They're doing some work with Tesla on battery storage, renewable projects. They're doing a whole set of things because they've taken more local control over their energy system in partnership with PG&E. BayRen, the building retrofits big network being run by ABAG with the 9 counties, and a whole set of things on renewables in the region. So that's third. And the fourth and the last of the major focus areas that we found in the surveying is really around natural systems. There are a whole set of groups, NGOs and others working. The Sonoma Veg Map is coming out, and we'll have links in our report so you can look these things up. TBC3 is doing a whole set of downscaled climate data sets for the entire 9-county region for land managers to use on hydrology and future hydrology. NBCI down here in the second row is leading Sonoma's effort with the new Sonoma County 2020 climate plan, and that adaptation will be a big part of. Work on Baylands goals, on Nature Conservancy, there are a whole set of groups, Point Blue. Save Mount Diablo is doing a whole set of work around carbon sequestration in the park system. And a number of our parks districts are looking at that issue, and also how they can be a buffer for fire protection with open space and all. So our parks districts, East Bay Regional Parks, are definitely putting this into all of their policies. So a whole set of things here on natural systems. Those are the 4 big areas. These others have some work going on, but less. And you'll hear about some of this work in one of the workshops this afternoon. There's some things starting now on health. There's more attention on vulnerable communities, some on food security and on distant impacts, but less than those first 4 big focus areas that I showed you. So it's a good start. We have a number of projects in the region, but it's not nearly what we need. You know, we need to be working at a bigger scale. We need to be working more quickly. Things have to happen now. We can't wait to start planning, 5 years from now. So this is a good start, but I'm going to look now quickly at 5 issues that we've heard from stakeholders that are holding us back. And this is, again, where CRI can really jump in and make a difference by bringing together academics with policymakers and staff, and NGOs and the business community, what can we do together that would get at some of these impacts? And your breakouts today are going to get more into depth. I'll just touch on a few of the issues here. The first one is really, it's a willy-nilly world out there for, there are really no great roles set yet for cities and counties, for the region, for states. You know, we're all kind of making it up as we go along, and it's pretty inefficient right now. No real structure. This applies a lot to sea level rise, but it applies some to the other areas as well. Probably water's the one exception where the authority and all is fairly well laid out, although maybe the water experts will disagree with that in that breakout. But it's at least more clear than some of these other efforts, and especially the coastal flooding work. You know, who's in charge on sea level rise? Who's in charge of health? Or who's in charge in the Bay Area of heat? Who's in charge of protecting our brand, which David talked about? Who's in charge of food prices? There are a whole set of issues here for which we do not have a structure right now, and that's going to be a key issue for us. I've put with each one of these problems, and there are 5 of them that we're going to do quickly, something that's kind of shining the way, you know, a light that may help us. And here's one on structure. Sonoma has formed the first legally constituted climate protection authority with elected official board of anywhere in the state. And it's a start. And Jake McKenzie should be here today, and a couple of others from RCPA. They took their transportation authority, and now they sit also as the Regional Climate Protection Authority. It's a start. Finance is a huge issue, as Michael talked about. There's a huge need for resources. In each of the county meetings we've just done, we heard this loud and clear. For planning and then eventually for implementation, we're not even close in terms of the resources that we need. So that would be second. And most of our stakeholders get it, as I'm sure you do, that money is not growing on trees these days in Sacramento or in DC. We're going to have to get much more creative about how we go about financing both planning and implementation. We're going to have to bring in the financial gurus. We're going to have to look harder at the cap and trade money. We're going to have to see where we can shift resources, where we can use university resources, where can we find the resources to get going in a much stronger way here, and a more creative way. And I'll give you a couple of examples of, I think, leading the way here. Again, the Napa River Flood Project, they chose to set a local tax, to tax themselves, to pay for improvements that were going to benefit the entire community. And they came together around a solution. It wasn't the Army Corps' original solution. It was a community-based solution that was really going to use Living River principles, protect businesses, protect habitat and all, and fund it locally and tax themselves. They did, and it's been, and it is a wonderful example of a success. Another would be the San Francisco Restoration Authority, which you'll be hearing about more as we go through the next year. Probably going to have a ballot measure, a parcel tax in the region next fall in November that would fund wetlands restoration in the region. So that's something, these are the kinds of things we're going to have to be thinking more creatively about. The third is information, and Michael talked about this earlier, and we have a lot of information. You know, how do we get it to decision makers, and how do we also turn it into a compelling story? There are really 2 sets of needs we've seen here. One, for planners. What do I plan for? Planners out there that we're talking to are overwhelmed by all the different data sets and all the different places they could go. Give me some guidance as to where I can go to get the data that I need and the locally specific data that I need to plan for my city or for my area. Who can I trust? Where's the guidance on this? And the second is on this notion of a compelling story. We have about 80 stories out there right now about what's happening with climate change and what's happening with climate change in the Bay Area. We're going to need a much more compelling, science-based narrative that we can translate and use with political leaders and with the public to really sell why we have to do this work and why we have to get at it in a much bigger fashion. So a couple of quick, again, just possibilities here of things that are showing the way. Silicon Valley 2.0 is a very interesting project. It again will be in our report. $1 million SGC grant where they've really done a great analysis in 9 different sectors, a gap analysis in Santa Clara County of different climate impacts on the different sectors. And Jim may mention this one in a minute, but Bay Area Council is just embarking on a very interesting looking study with more foundation and funding from others on an extreme storm scenario for the Bay Area and what it would mean in terms of economic damage and economic costs for our region. That's the kind of thing of turning, again, the science into a story that people get about things that matter to them in their everyday lives. Fourth, vulnerable communities and populations. We are doing some things, but, you know, as David said, these populations are going to have a much harder time bouncing back. Kind of the definition of lack of resilience, low-income seniors, disabled children, certain places around the Bay. There's some good research on this. Pacific Institute has done some great report called The Climate Gap that was done in conjunction with experts here at Berkeley. But we need a lot more on this. There's work in the public health field right now that Linda Rudolph will talk about some this afternoon. A lot more focus needs to be paid on these populations that will take a bigger brunt of the impacts. And here's one example. There aren't many at this point, but this is a very good one of the Oakland Climate Action Coalition really got involved with the city in the development of their climate action plan. And these were a coalition of community-based organizations. And at first, frankly, city staff was a little leery of the whole thing. You know, you're city staff and you're doing a plan, and now you've got all these groups coming in to tell you what ought to be in it. And we talked with city staff a month ago, and they're really pleased with how the whole thing went because they got a stronger and bolder plan by working with all of these community groups and a lot more support when they went to city council for the goal and for the strategies that they put together. This was mostly GHG reduction, but the coalition is now turning its attention to adaptation and resilience as well. So it's, again, a possible model. We'd like to see that kind of thing more in the Bay Area. And finally, to echo what a couple of speakers have already talked about, we get it in the adaptation world, the practitioners get it that are out there, that you can't just be doing adaptation and resilience. That the biggest part of an adaptation strategy in the Bay Area has got to have a huge section of GHG reduction. If we don't do this work here, and we don't work to push Sacramento and DC and internationally, all of the adaptation work that we're starting to do and going to do is going to be much more difficult, if not impossible. So you'll see on the left here some of the things that are going on that are significant, that have a potential to reduce GHGs here in the region, and the pie chart here shows the kind of breakup of how GHGs, our own emissions in the region from transportation, from industry, from electricity generation. And finally, last slide, this is from the state, and it shows the line here of how we're starting we've started to level off GHG emissions statewide now. Policies are starting to take hold, and Jeff Greenblatt is here, and we'll talk about this a little more in that workshop. And the line is starting to bend. It's not going up at this point. And we have policies in place that the state believes will meet our 2020 goal, which is a rather modest goal, but it's good. We're making progress towards that. But look how steep the line gets after 2020. And that's our real challenge to how do we get to 2050, which is going to take a much bigger set of strategies now around GHG reduction. So that's some clues from some of the stakeholders in the region. We're very excited about the CRI and how it can help all of us to move forward, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Bruce. So our last speaker this morning is Jim Wunderman, who's the president and CEO of the Bay Area Council. It's a CEO-led public policy organization that's focused on making the San Francisco Bay and Bay Area and Silicon Valley the most globally competitive area in the world. They've focused extensively on a number of areas that are relevant to us today, including sustainability, renewable energy, and what they call business climate. And that's, I think, a reserved word in the business community, but I think as we're discussing here today, that's going to take on a whole new meaning. So with that, Jim, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much, and thanks for having me. And we are the most competitive place in the world. The question is, can we keep it that way? We're always scrapping to do that. I want to thank and recognize Bruce and Will Travis for beginning this convening, and the Joint Policy Committee that brings together our 4 regional agencies plays a really important role in making sure everybody's on the same ship as we sail this difficult and uncharted sea. And I think it's a big step forward to bring together the resources of these three major universities, which are a strategic advantage for us in this region. We're just very, very lucky to have the likes of Stanford and this university, UC Berkeley and UC Davis. I teach a little bit at Davis. I'm an weeny bit partial to Davis, but we work very closely with all these universities as well as the state universities, and there are a lot of stakeholders here, and it's a very important role in this very, very regional issue. The council, I and the council have been involved in these issues now for quite some time. We as an organization, I think we were the business group. We didn't just endorse AB 32. We were actually helped write it back in the day, and the low carbon fuel standards and SB 375. And I served on the infamous Regional Targets Advisory Committee that kind of came up with the standards for how to reduce carbon through vehicle mile travel policy that's resulted in Plan Bay Area and other regional policies throughout the state. So we're kind of veterans of the issues surrounding some of the things that we heard about this morning as to sort of how to attack the future of climate change through GHG reductions on the local and regional scale, which is all very important stuff. We also, the Bay Area Council serves as the trade office with China for the state of California. And so we're involved in a lot of different meetings with Governor Brown. In fact, we have one this Thursday down in Los Angeles where we talk about trade with China, investment to and from China, and the conversation always goes to greenhouse gas reduction. I think that's really why the governor's in this thing, and we've signed some pretty potent agreements. There's a lot of potential to be able to leverage AB 32 and the other laws and regulations with China that desperately needs to attack this problem in the place that's producing just massive amounts of GHGs and pollution and so forth. So a lot of opportunity, as was stated. We may not be able to solve the world's problem by reducing GHGs here, but we actually can have quite a bit of impact on it, and I think we will. And perhaps this new collaborative can help address some of the opportunities that we have, because we have these MOUs which stipulate the kinds of things we can work on with China, but how to actually go about doing that is a challenging thing. That said, my feeling is, and I think David's earlier presentation about what happens in 2050 and 2070, and if we do this and we don't, it sometimes feels a little bit theoretical when you talk about that. It's also a little depressing. The day started out pretty good, and you had your presentation, and now I'm depressed. But that's good. This is depressing stuff, and it's supposed to drive us to action, which is what this is all about. But adaptation is different, and this is about that. It's about being resilient. It's about actually doing the difficult planning and execution to actually protect the region for the next century or two. I participated with Pacific Institute and that other infamous university, USC, some years ago on the California adaptation strategy, which Governor Schwarzenegger then adopted. I sat with a bunch of folks, some of you are in this room, much smarter than I about how to go about doing this, and we struggled. I mean, it was even then very, very tough to come up with, to address a lot of the issues that were raised around rising seas and impacts to water and fire and those kinds of things, and what you would actually then do and change as a state in order to adapt to that. And that's where the rubber kind of meets the road there, and it is really tough. A couple of years ago, I remember it was actually 3 years ago, because it was when the 49ers should have been in the Super Bowl and lost to the Giants, and they went to the Super Bowl, and I went back east, and I visited a friend who lived out on Bayshore, Long Island. He had just bought this house, and he was showing off this great house. It was a nice house, right out on the water there, and he had his boat and his nice house, and he was explaining just why this was so great. Well, the house is gone. The boat's gone. He's gone. He didn't pass away. He moved to Florida, as people from there will do. But it wasn't a planned move. What happened is he lost everything, and as a lot of people I grew up with did. So this is very real stuff. And he would explain to me, he's in the business of fixing up people's houses, a contractor and that kind of thing. And he would talk about the mood of the people on Long Island after Sandy. And basically his sense of it was people just wanted to get the heck out of there. Get the house fixed up, sell it, and move on. Fix it up, sell it, get out of Long Island. It's inconceivable. I grew up in this area. It's inconceivable that people would come to that place, and yet that's where they got to. And I hope this process that we're going through will lead us to some difficult decisions that we can execute over the next decade or generation that will prevent us from being in the place that they found themselves in. It's not theoretical. It's reality that about 250,000 people live in the area in our region that would be in inundation zones. And as was indicated in the slide that David provided, they tend to be in low-income, concentrated in low-income and at-risk communities. The infrastructure, our general estimation is about $63 billion in infrastructure that's at risk from inundation. It includes something on the order of 800 miles of freeways and roads, our 3 international airports, our Port of Oakland, Port of San Francisco, Port of Richmond, some of the, those important economic entities. Of course, we've got major companies that are the envy of the world, the Googles, the Yahoos, the Facebooks, NASA, institutions like that, they're at risk, and that's just the highlights of the list. It's really it's quite a list of companies that sit at or below sea level in the South Bay, protected by levees that won't protect them should we end up with one of these 100-year storm events, which was described as the future high tide event. And in fact, as Bruce showed, the council, with the support of the Moore Foundation, we're taking a look at trying to really quantify this in a study to be able to show folks this is what the risks are and get reasonably granular about it. So from our perspective, it comes down to some choices that we're going to have to make as a society. We're either going to have to decide to retreat from the sea, pull back. And in some cases, that's probably what we're going to do. We could, I suppose, make like Amsterdam and the Netherlands and build, massive network of seawalls. Very expensive, but that's the Dutch are sort of used to doing this, and I think the Netherlands, I think they're now a 10,000-year floodplain or something like that. So they've mastered doing this by necessity, or some more integrated system of hard and soft defenses. And those are the choices that we have, and probably some combination of those things are where we're going to end up, and it's going to take some very thoughtful exercise in order to get to that. Regardless of what we choose to do, it's going to be very, very expensive to do this. It's billions of dollars that today we just don't have identified to do this. When you go to Washington with your hand out or your hat out, the hat better be at least half full to get some response out of Washington. So part of this is going to be for anybody in the country. Certainly for us here in the Bay Area, we're going to have to engage in shared sacrifice and make this a priority, which I think people will do as they understand this better and what the implications of this are. There will be, I think, a regional measure on the ballot. Put a lot of effort through the Restoration Authority to get to the place where we can have a ballot measure in 2014 to address this issue. It won't raise a ton of money. It'll probably be somewhere in the $9 or $10 parcel tax range, but at least enough money, raise maybe $125, $150 million over 10 years, but enough money to at least be able to go to Washington, to Sacramento, and talk about what we've done, so we can talk about what we think, we think they need to do. There'll be a lot of debate in the future about the nature of development from the point of view of the business community. We don't think that just marching away from the shoreline is probably a very, very good strategy. In fact, in order to finance a lot of the infrastructure that we're going to need along the shoreline, appropriate development there is probably the solution in some cases. In other cases, probably not. So we needed to figure out where those cases are. And figure out how to balance this out. It's very tough, as we don't have any regional agency that's in charge of this area, or food, or a lot of other things. There's no regional agency in charge of the region's economy either. And so, as a business associations like ours, or the Silicon Valley Leadership Group, and others, we're trying to do our best to work locally and regionally and at the state level and at the federal level to sort of, get policies in place and get them implemented without necessarily having anybody who's in charge of this for the region. And maybe on this issue, we need somebody in government to represent that way of thinking, because the implications on the regional economy where this issue is concerned are going to be, I think, quite consequential. I just close. This is a Bay Area. How many agree that this is a very special place, Bay Area? That it is a very special place. There's a lot of reasons why we have worked so well, and why people are coming from all around the world to be here, and why institutions like Stanford and UC Berkeley and UC Davis succeed here and are able to provide the leadership that they do, is because this is a unique place. It has unique considerations, and it has a unique geography and a unique climate. And that's not always at the top of somebody else's list of important things. So it's why I make a stink about making sure that there's leadership in the California state legislature, and piss people off here and in other parts of the state when I say it, because at the end of the day, we need representation that has regard for the very special qualities and uniqueness of the region. We're living surrounding a bay. It's not the case in the other part of the state. It's not that they disregard us. It's just that they don't know what it's like. And so when dollars and policies are meted out in the future, here and in Washington, where they recognize Puget Sound as being really, really important financially, and something about the Bay Area gets them less excited financially, we need to be able to come together and provide leadership on these things. I think it's very important on a number of fronts for our region to come together and stick together, plan together, and fight together as we go through. Is going to be, I think, one of the amazing challenges, but also opportunities as we move into and through the 21st century. So I want to thank you for having us, and we're your partners in this, and we may agree on a lot of stuff, and we may disagree on some other things, but that's the nature of it. I think this institute has a lot of potential, and we stand ready to support it. Keep us in the loop. So thank you, everybody.
So I think we're running a little bit behind, but my presentation is shorter, deliberately to make sure that we had time for questions. Would it make sense, I would like to invite questions now for the three speakers, if you would like to query any of them. And I think it might be smart just to have Jim, if you wouldn't mind coming back up, if we could have all three of you down here for a brief panel. While you're doing that, I'm going to clear the alarms regarding my friend's birthday off my screen. Everybody now knows it's Mary Lane's birthday. So questions from the audience for for our three speakers. Yes, thank you, Dan. No, I will find one. Give me a second.
There we go. This is a question for Jim. I'm Tony Wexler at UC Davis. So one thing we're good at in the Bay Area is innovation. I think we're going to need to do some innovation for climate adaptation. So has there been a discussion in the Bay Area Council about how the business community can contribute to adaptation?
Yeah, there has. And if you look back at Bruce's first slide where it had all of those, handwritten notes that Leclerc came up with, one of them was a business community collaboration that's been ongoing, led collaboration with the Moore Foundation that SVLG and the Bay Area Council are partners that's helping, I think, to lead toward the restoration project's capability to win and go on the ballot and so forth, and really looking hard at where the vulnerabilities are in the region, and particularly in the South Bay, where we know there's this massive concentration of business and economic activity. And so, yeah, I think it's fair to say the business community is engaged. We've got companies engaged. I think as the strategies are fleshed out, a lot of companies are going to be willing to come to the table. And so, I think it's a beginning, not an end point, but there are processes in place to engage the business community in adaptation, and businesses are really concerned about it, and they're planning for it, and they're not going to wait. One thing about business, you mentioned the wine industry as an example, is they're thinking about the future. These companies plan for the future. So on a whole number of fronts, when it comes to their future facilities and growth, especially the faster growing companies are thinking about where to put their future people. And in the Bay Area, we have a number of different challenges that confront those companies. We have the positive things about the Bay Area, but the challenges, this is one of those things. And they're thinking about it. And so we need to pull them together and have good solutions. And I think we're on a good path to at least begin that conversation.
Hi, so I'm Preeti from Institute of Environmental Entrepreneurship, and my question's for David, although the rest of the panel is free to comment. David, this is a sort of a mitigation adaptation type of question, and I'm referring to your slide where you projected a vegetation response. Now, given that vegetation response, assuming that's what's going to happen, what to you are the two most important consequences? What does that vegetation response mean? And again, my context is adaptation mitigation, but what does that mean? How do we respond to that response? Thanks.
So you frame the mitigation and adaptation, so implicit there's the carbon question. And I think the answer to that is the same as the other part of mitigation, that if you just took the Bay Area map alone, you could add a model of the carbon transitions and it would be small. But at a global scale, the land use component of the global climate models is very important. So, and Bill, would I be accurate in saying that the models are probably pretty conservative about the possibility of vegetation losing a lot of carbon? I mean, if there's widespread drought and mortality, we could we could quickly reverse the source-sink relationship. So that's that's a big question mark. In terms of the adaptation strategies, they're challenging. A lot of what happens in the natural world is on a scale where we have limited capacity to get in there and do things. I mean, so a lot of this comes back to understanding the toolbox of managers, and this is what we're very engaged in our work, is to work with land managers on what's the toolbox at your disposal and which can be used differently. If one of the toolboxes was the ability to fly large planes over the Bay Area and water the forest, okay, well, then we could fight drought. That's not in the toolbox, right? So a lot of what's available has to do with, grazing practices in the rangelands are things that we actually can work with ranchers on, the way that cattle are being used on rangelands that could impact vegetation responses, and the way that fire is dealt with. In the Bay Area, that's going to be extraordinarily difficult. Anywhere you have the density of high-value infrastructure that we have, to get away from just a pure suppression approach to fire. So I don't have any quick answer on how fire policy would shift. It's shifting a lot in the Sierra Nevada in terms of allowing fire to get back into the systems as part of natural processes. And then the great thing about the Bay Area, 25% of the Bay Area is protected open space. And then another 50% is agricultural rangeland, not protected for conservation. But we're in an incredible position with that network. So enhancing that network and sustaining it is key to allowing natural processes to continue. There's very few metropolitan areas that are in the position we're in. But then, a big drought comes along. There's not a lot you can do to keep trees from dying. So some of these impacts there's no toolbox there that just means we can sort of stop it. It's all about how we respond after impacts. So another uplifting answer.
Yeah, good morning. Jan Hartmans, University of California, Davis. My question is maybe more practical in terms of what I haven't heard this morning, in terms of how much are we thinking about coastal wetland restoration and as a means to protect the land, the Bay Area.
Well, I'll just give a preference to the break. I think the breakout groups will dig very much into this. Grant Ballard's here from Point Blue, which is very active in this. So the way we've constructed the breakouts is to just try to have those voices and also have panels so that it's really an open discussion, not like here's our answer and here's your answer, So you're absolutely right. I was skimming through big picture, but like Jim said, there's all these different tools that we have, right? These are the tools, and what's the balance that we're going to use?
And a number of those projects on that first messy slide I showed are wetlands restoration or related to that. Corte Madera, South Bay, a whole bunch, a number of different places, BCDC and others are involved.
I think one last question, and then we're going to have to move on.
So I want to focus on a question for Jim, because writ large, whatever we do here doesn't matter to some extent unless we really start to bend the curve, and that falls upon the big emitters in China. And Jim, you mentioned this, and I wanted to get a sense from you, and I know this is still new, but what do you think the Bay Area has to offer China, and how can we leverage what we're doing here to help make an impact in that huge economy?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. Really interesting. We had the minister who leads China's climate change strategies from an organization called NDRC came to visit. He was on his way to Brazil, and he stopped in California to meet with the governor, and we hosted this in our office for them to sign an MOU on this issue, which we could provide. And it was pretty exciting, and I got to spend about 15 or 20 minutes, privately with him to discuss this. And he said, he started pointing out research in the Bay Area, institutions in the Bay Area, naming some of the ones involved in this institute, and particularly leveraging California and its role in the United States, because the frustration that China has is China actually has a policy. And they're pretty good at actually implementing policy. When they get serious about doing something, they do it. They have massive challenge, but they have policy, and it goes down from the national government down to the provinces, down to the local government, and you're as a mayor of a city, you're held accountable for your results, and GHG emissions are now part of that. So they've been moving in this direction, and the United States doesn't have this, but California does. And so they see California as a way to somewhat leverage the United States to get a global climate change agreement. If California and China can start agreeing on stuff and working together, there's a possibility that this could move the world, because it's not just the U.S., it's other countries as well, to finally get a serious settlement on how to address this problem. Because you're right, short of getting that done, it's going to be, we're not going to be successful in bending that curve. So that's the way he felt. Governor Brown was very excited about this, and I think sees the leadership opportunity on this, and he's always talking about it. And we do have in the Bay Area, some of the top research institutions, just beyond the universities, the laboratories that are represented here, private labs, venture capital, and all the tools that anybody could want to be able to, develop solutions that can then be implemented on the global stage, which is really China. So, if we can help come up with the technologies and the solutions, China can help implement those things. So it's an interesting partnership, and we certainly invite everybody to participate in this. We don't have all the answers, I think, but there's a lot of potential in this that I think will roll out over the next year or two. If we do our job, I hope that answers the question.
Thank you so much. And let's thank the panel again, please. Before I start, I'd like to thank Mayor Tom Bates for joining us this morning. So thank you very much, Mayor. We're very pleased to have you here. And we're very grateful to the Brower Institute for hosting this meeting. I'm also really grateful personally for all of you to turn out. The design of today is envisioned to be a conversation. So we're almost at the end of the information sort of traditional academic transmittal mode and moving into breakout sessions. But it's be prudent for us before we launch into the breakouts to talk a little bit about the path that has led us to today and what we hope the Climate Readiness Institute will become. I'm standing here because in part because I represent a capability within the Institute for doing climate projection at more or less an industrial scale. Mark talked about the leveraging that's going on. What stands behind the work that I do is about $500 million of investment every year from the Department of Energy in supercomputing. So there is some seriously big computers that stand behind what we are capable of delivering in great specificity to the Bay Area. And we're ready to turn that engine loose in partnership with all the other people represented in this room, working on architecture, working on business, to figure out solutions. So the other role that I've had recently has been as a lead author in the IPCC. And I'm showing you an animation from one of the climate model projections that shows you how the Northern Hemisphere is going to warm. You'll notice that, yes, it's getting warmer. There's not a great deal of regional specificity in these projections. And I think this is one of the reasons why, with all due respect to the IPCC and the huge amount of time that we've all devoted to the report that just came out in September, and there are two more coming out, one in March, being led by Chris Field at Stanford, and a third on mitigation measures in April. With all due respect to that process and the value that it's brought to the international community, it's really time to move on and to think globally, yes, but to act locally. And so my personal motivation for standing here is that I think the science behind climate change is at this point very clear. The shoe has very much shifted to the other foot. It is no longer incumbent on the scientific community to prove its case. We're well beyond that at this point. I mean, the skeptical community, yes, they're busy, and they will be busy, I suppose, until the seas are lapping around their ankles. But the shoe has definitely shifted to the other foot. And I'm quite interested in now seeing how we can take the science that we're doing and make it useful. And that's, as Mark pointed out, as David pointed out, the scientists in this room and the faculty across the universities who are represented here are all keenly interested in taking the information that we have and making it useful to the community which we so treasure. So the mission of the Climate Readiness Institute is to develop a partnership. That's really what this is designed to be, a two-way communication between institutions of knowledge generation represented by universities in the Berkeley Laboratory and our communities. And this is going to involve a partnership with not only policymakers, but with business leaders. The entire community is going to be integral to the success of this institute. And I've listed here cutting edge science because this started primarily as a discussion among physical scientists and biologists, but we also view this as broadening out, we hope, to the entire mission of the universities represented here. Because this is an all hands on deck kind of issue. Moving on to adaptation strategies, as we discussed, mitigation tools, there's some phenomenal opportunity here. The businesses that figure out how to move us to a sustainable low carbon economy are going to make out like gangbusters. And so it is incumbent on us to help work with our business partners in figuring out what those pathways are. Initially, we want to start by focusing on a low carbon Bay Area, but as we've heard, this could serve as a template for action across the state, and we hope ultimately across the nation. We're certainly open to those partnerships, and we've already heard through some other venues on campus last fall about efforts, for example, in Los Angeles that have proven highly successful. We're very open to broadening the envelope of this effort after we figure out how to get our own house in order. So the goals of this first summit really are to launch a conversation, and most of the day, after we have our break here in another 9 minutes, we're going to move into a mode of talking to each other, and that will basically drive the rest of the day. We're going to discuss some key challenges and opportunities around 4 topics that we identified in discussions with Bruce, with Bob Dickinson and others that we thought would serve as useful starting points, but this is by no means meant to be an exclusive set of topics. These are basically a set of conversation starters, if you will, around the area of the coast and flooding, low carbon strategies represented here with a picture from the website for the high-speed train that's being planned for California, water supply represented here by Hetch Hetchy, and by health and agriculture. And here's a picture of a local farmer's market. We hope that these discussions and the breakouts will identify potential directions for engagement within the Institute. And we particularly are keen to foster conversations among a group of people who, many of whom know each other, for example, from the public policy sector, but those of us in academia may not have had the pleasure of meeting you or engaging with you, and so this is also meant to really foster these connections to start the conversations. Critically, we would like to emerge from today with some initial action plans that we could undertake in the Institute, areas which you think are particularly well suited for an institute of this kind. And I'll describe a little bit what those boundary conditions look like in a moment, what the Institute's going to do that's complementary to other existing efforts in terms of its design, and also identify next steps. So as Mark mentioned, this is the first of what we hope will be several targeted summits. We'd like to hold several more this spring. We have the means to do so, and so let's start thinking about what those next summits could look like. So the thing that we think is distinctive about the Climate Readiness Institute is the duality of its mission. And I actually spent probably too much time figuring out whether or not the Institute would work in terms of the educational research missions of the institutions involved before I began thinking about the action. But I wanted to make sure that it would serve both functions. Let me start with the action first. So during the working groups, you will discuss several different modes of interaction between the knowledge base represented by the universities and by Berkeley Laboratory with the public, private sector, and non-governmental organizations, local communities. They could include joint research projects. They could include bringing members of your organizations onto the campuses to either mentor students or to gain knowledge about the bleeding edge in new architecture, design principles, climate change, smart buildings, et cetera. It could include white papers and action guides that could serve as templates for governmental action. It could also include exchanges between the universities and the broader community involving our graduate students and our undergraduates. We have a lot of students who are highly motivated and would benefit greatly from the exchange, and we think would bring a tremendous amount of energy to the organizations and communities represented here. So this is, you've got over 100,000 people through these 3 partner universities and the laboratories. It's really quite a phenomenal community of people who'd be willing to farm out and also bring people back in. And so we hope that this will set up a mode of interaction which will be highly fruitful. I'm also standing here representing the faculties in these universities, and we think that this institute could be really quite transformational in terms of our educational mission. So I've talked to a number of different departments at Cal, also with faculty at both Davis and Stanford, and it's clear that we think that the universities involved bring complementary skills and a set of departments that would benefit greatly from this kind of transaction, of really learning what the real challenges are in a very real-world way as opposed to a hypothetical way. The other institution I want to mention here, and it's because it's a critical one, is Berkeley Laboratory. Berkeley Laboratory, which is right up the hill from us, is the oldest of the DOE laboratories. It is a completely unclassified institution. No classified research occurs there. It is to be distinguished from other laboratories which do classified research. And its mission now has a very large portfolio devoted to sustainable energy and to climate research. And we bring some skills in terms of doing team-oriented work that are also complementary with the universities. So this is the set of partners that we've brought together for the launch of the mission and the Institute. So here they are. And I managed to find clock towers for two of the universities, not the third. Sorry, Davis. I searched the website in vain for even a small standing vertical structure. I'll have to. I'm sorry. Thank you. Yeah, this is what happens when you're doing these searches late at night. And for Berkeley Lab, I'm afraid we had to go horizontal. Yeah, but this is our advanced light source up on the hill. So for academic institutions, this is the word mashup for all the different entities that are represented at this morning's meeting. So we've got representatives deliberately from state and local government agencies, public utilities, the private sector and industry, quite a very critical sector to engage here, and non-governmental organizations. So we're thrilled to have all of you invited and also thrilled with your interest. The other thing I want to do to distinguish the Institute is to point out that we have started, this is not meant to be parochial, but it is meant to focus on our extremely precious backyard. And there are a number of strategic reasons why I really decided that we had to have a local focus. First, it makes it very easy for us to work face-to-face. And I think given the fact that we are starting a series of conversations, some of which are going to involve tough choices, tough conversations, it's actually critical to be able to work face-to-face. I think that's vital for getting those conversations past square one, because no matter the fact that I think we all share a lot of values in this room, there's going to be some tough issues that we're going to have to discuss. And I think, and also some tremendous opportunities from working face-to-face, so both a positive and an opportunity and a challenge. It also is critical for our students, I think, to be able to work locally with mentors. This is really valuable for them, so they can cycle, take a train, drive to the people who are mentoring them. That's also critical to success on the educational mission side of the Institute. Obviously, we're all vested in the future of the Bay Area, and here are the 9 counties that are immediately ringing the Bay, and this could serve as a model for the state of California, we hope. I also want to point out, and Mark mentioned this, that the Institute, this is not a done deal, in the sense that this is early days in the Institute, and we have deliberately created a very loose, it's not even really a governance structure with the lab and the 3 partner universities to get us to this point, precisely so that we could work with you on defining what the Institute is, that it is a mutually beneficial entity. So those include the initial projects, which we're going to discuss this morning and afternoon in your breakouts. We actually have left open the governance of the Institute. This is because all 3 universities in the lab need to think about what shape this is going to take. But we also need to make sure that the barriers to communication and action with the public and private sector are as low as possible. And so we essentially need form following function. And the function of this institute is to enable bilateral interaction. So that's something we need to work through in partnership with you and with the other universities. We need to make sure open communication, metrics for success, pathways for sustained engagement, all of those have to sort of follow from the way that we set up the governance structure. And so for that reason, we've deliberately left it beyond the summit to really begin gelling that particular part of the institute launch. And another critical issue is how we fund the Institute. And we can talk about this later, but this funding mechanism is, the basic idea is that I think there'll be a little bit of self-sorting The good projects will naturally attract support, but we also need to make sure that the barriers to action on both the university and lab side and the outside world are as low as possible. And then I think that what that means is a sustained foundation of funding, to put it quite simply. So we'll need to think about that further going forward. That's going to be critical for the Institute to essentially not be in sort of an ambulance chasing mode looking after grant money or waiting until a grant comes in. We need to be able to act and act quickly, not to wait 15 years, as we heard from Jim, but be able to act immediately. Okay, so our agenda for today, we are, I'm almost done here. We're going to go into morning breakouts. We're going to start with Bay and coastal flooding. That will be in the museum across the way. So if you walk out the door through which you entered this building, there's a big, beautiful orange building, the Magnus Collection. It's part of the Bancroft Library. That's where you go for that session. If you're interested in staying with the low carbon economy, that's in this building. We'll then have lunch, followed by 2 more breakouts in the afternoon. Water supply will again be over in the Magnus building. Health, agriculture, and business will be in the Brower Center. We'll then convene for sort of reports from the breakouts, and I'm going to talk about the breakouts in just a moment, and then have a reception and dinner. We don't have a comedian speaking at dinner. We don't have a dinner speaker at dinner. What we do have is you speaking at dinner. So the goal of the dinner is for you to continue talking amongst each other, and that's really, again, integral to fostering conversation throughout the remainder of the day. The breakouts, this is thanks so much to Bruce for really thinking through this exhaustively about how to make this work, and this is based on his experience about how to get these conversations going. Our objectives are to spur development, identify some projects. There's going to be a very quick introduction by a facilitator, and then basically 3 parts to the breakout. Framing by panelists, very quick, 3 points apiece. Followed by, and so these are going to each take up an equal amount of time, table discussions by all the participants, and we urge you not to sit with birds of a feather. So if you know somebody, maybe you should think about introducing yourself to someone new. Followed by a large group discussion led by a facilitator and also a professional graphic renderer of your ideas. So this is going to be kind of cool. I haven't seen this done before, but someone's going to be mapping your ideas in real time. So think carefully about how you want that to look graphically. Okay, logistics for the breakouts. So this is, your choice. So self-select, please, on where you want to go. I've mentioned where the meetings are across the way, and I should conclude with a set of acknowledgements. So these are people who have really been instrumental in getting us to this morning and to this day. Bob Dickinson, who was one of the people who really led us at Cal to start this conversation. Mac McCone, we really appreciate all the support that you've given us. Dan Miller has been in the thick of the meetings since the outset and has been integral in sort of steering the conversation and the direction of this meeting. Bruce, we can't thank you enough for really starting the conversation with us about how to start this, and Mark for all your support from Letters in Science. And lastly, I'd like to make a personal thanks to Mary Yum, who has been working with me tirelessly, willing to get up at 7 o'clock in the morning, juggle her family responsibilities to make this summit happen. So let's thank all these, everyone. And let me suggest that we table questions for the time being, unless anyone has. I'll take one burning question. Otherwise, I think we need to go to break. So does anyone have an absolutely burning question? Coffee, I heard that. Let's go. Thanks.